There are moments in a conflict when diplomacy doesn't just stall, it collapses so publicly, so completely, that both sides end up further apart than they were before anyone sat down at the table. And what just happened between the United States and Iran is one of those moments. According to Bloomberg, the United States presented Iran with a 15-point plan to end the war. According to that same reporting, one of the central demands in that plan was that Iran dismantle its nuclear sites. The headline read directly, U.S. demands Iran dismantle nuclear sites as part of rejected 15-point plan. The New York Times separately reported that Pakistan offered to host direct U.S.-Iran talks, and that the U.S. had sent Iran a written proposal to end the broader Middle East conflict. Iran's response was not ambiguous. The Associated Press reported that Iran dismissed the U.S. ceasefire plan outright and issued its own counterproposal. Bloomberg reported that Iran's counterdemands included authority over the Strait of Hormuz and reparations for damages caused by the military campaign. Al Jazeera's breaking banner carried Tehran's assessment of the American proposal in a single phrase, calling it one-sided and unfair. And then came the line that captured the entire diplomatic breakdown in 5 words. As reported across multiple outlets, Iran's position amounted to telling the U.S. President administration, "You are negotiating with yourselves." That is not just a rhetorical jab. It is a strategic message with enormous consequences. Because while Washington has been publicly claiming that negotiations are underway, Tehran has categorically denied that any real talks have taken place. Al Jazeera's editorial analysis posed the question that the entire world is now asking. U.S. says they're talking. Iran says they're not. Who's telling the truth? And to understand why this matters, why the collapse of this 15-point plan could reshape the trajectory of the entire conflict, you need to understand what was actually in that proposal. You need to understand what Iran demanded instead, and what happens now that the diplomatic channel has effectively gone dark. Let's start with what we know about the American plan. Bloomberg's reporting confirmed that the 15-point proposal included a demand for Iran to dismantle its nuclear facilities. That is not a minor request. Iran's nuclear program has been the single most contested issue between Tehran and the West for more than 2 decades. Multiple international agreements have been negotiated, signed, abandoned, and renegotiated over this exact question. And now, in the middle of an active military campaign, the United States put nuclear dismantlement on the table as a condition for ending the fighting. The New York Times reported that the U.S. had sent Iran a written plan to end the Middle East war, and that it was unclear whether Iran or Israel supported it. Pakistan offered to serve as a neutral venue for direct talks between Washington and Tehran. That offer, reported by the New York Times on March 25th, represented a significant diplomatic gesture. It showed Pakistan maintaining relationships with both the United States and Iran, and positioning itself as a potential mediator. But it didn't work. The plan collapsed before it could gain any traction. And the reasons it collapsed reveal a fundamental disconnect between what the two sides consider acceptable terms. According to the Associated Press, Iran dismissed the American ceasefire plan and issued its own counterproposal. Bloomberg's reporting added critical detail. Iran's counterdemands included gaining recognized authority over the Strait of Hormuz. It also included receiving financial reparations for damage inflicted during the U.S.-Israeli military campaign. Those demands are, from a Western strategic perspective, non-starters. Granting Iran formal authority over the Strait of Hormuz would effectively give Tehran a permanent chokehold on roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply. And reparations would imply that the U.S. military campaign was illegitimate, a concession no American administration would make during an active conflict. So what you have is two sides presenting maximalist positions that the other cannot accept. The U.S. demands nuclear dismantlement. Iran demands Hormuz authority and reparations. Neither side is willing to move toward the middle. And the result is a diplomatic void. It's a situation where both governments are talking publicly about peace while the missiles continue to fly. And they are continuing to fly. This is not a frozen conflict. This is an active high-intensity war with real casualties accumulating every day. According to Al Jazeera's live conflict tracker, the preliminary casualty figures, as of their latest update, show approximately 1,500 people killed in Iran. At least 18 were killed in Israel, 13 U.S. service members killed, and 21 killed across Gulf states. These are preliminary numbers, and the actual totals may be higher as reporting from active conflict zones continues to develop. The Associated Press reported that at least 1,000 U.S. troops from the 82nd Airborne Division are set to deploy to the Middle East. The New York Times reported a figure of 2,000 airborne troops being sent to the region. The Pentagon has confirmed these movements publicly, and they are happening against the backdrop of a diplomatic process that has effectively collapsed. Operation Epic Fury, the U.S. military campaign launched on February 28th according to CENTCOM's official website, continues without pause. CENTCOM has published multiple operational updates, photographs of B-52H Stratofortress bombers preparing for combat missions, and imagery showing the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group operating in the Persian Gulf. On March 11th, CENTCOM issued a warning in 6 languages telling civilians to avoid ports used by Iranian forces. On March 8th, a separate safety warning was issued to all civilians inside Iran. The military dimension of this conflict is escalating at the exact moment the diplomatic dimension is breaking down, and the consequences are radiating outward across the entire global economy. Bloomberg reported that oil prices were sitting near $89.81 a barrel on March 26th. Gold had surged to $4,585.50 an ounce. This level reflects deep market anxiety about the direction of the conflict. Bloomberg also reported that California diesel prices had topped $7 a gallon, reaching a record high. This happened as the state dealt with limited refining capacity compounded by disrupted global energy shipments. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 1/5 of the world's petroleum transits, remains largely closed. Bloomberg's live blog stated explicitly that the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed, with a return to normal traffic unlikely while war is raging. Al Jazeera reported that Iran's stated non-hostile ships may transit the strait with prior coordination. But this conditional access falls far short of the unrestricted passage that global shipping depends on. The energy shock is hitting hardest in Asia. Bloomberg reported that parts of Bangladesh are experiencing fuel queues stretching up to a kilometer. Motorists are waiting hours to refuel. The Philippines declared a national energy emergency, and its president signed a law to halt oil taxes ahead of a transport strike. The Associated Press reported that Asian nations are boosting coal usage as the Iran war squeezes global liquefied natural gas supplies. Al Jazeera reported that Qatar Energy declared force majeure on some of its LNG contracts after military attacks struck facilities at Ras Laffan Industrial City and Mesaieed Industrial City. Bloomberg reported that India purchased 60 million barrels of Russian oil for April. This massive procurement underscores how the conflict is reshaping global energy trade patterns. A separate Bloomberg analysis was headlined, "Iran War Shows Limits of BRICS as India Pushed to Choose Sides." It noted that the war is forcing countries that have tried to maintain strategic neutrality into increasingly difficult positions. And then there's the domestic political picture inside the United States, which is becoming more complicated by the day. The Associated Press published results of a new AP-NORC poll that found most Americans believe U.S. military action against Iran has gone too far. The AP also reported that conservatives gathering at CPAC found the political right openly divided over the Iran war. The New York Times reported that Senate Republicans again blocked a war powers resolution introduced by Senator Christopher Murphy. This would have required congressional authorization for the continued military campaign. That vote means the conflict continues without a formal legislative check. But public opinion is shifting. A White House press secretary stated, according to Bloomberg's live blog, that the administration is very close to meeting objectives of the Iran operation. But the Associated Press reported that some of U.S. President's stated war objectives remain unfulfilled even as he looks to wind down the conflict. U.S. President has publicly claimed that negotiations with Iran are ongoing. He stated that Iran is begging for a deal, according to Al Jazeera's reporting. But Tehran has flatly denied this characterization. Al Jazeera reported that Iran called the American plan one-sided and unfair. The Associated Press reported that Iran dismissed the plan and issued its own counterproposal. Bloomberg reported that Iran's counterdemands, Hormuz Authority and reparations, represent positions that Washington has shown no willingness to accept. Bloomberg's reporting also identified a potential Iranian negotiator, describing the figure as someone known for a strongman approach. Al Jazeera separately asked whether the U.S. was in contact with Iran's Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. They examined who he is within Iran's political hierarchy. But identifying a potential interlocutor is meaningless if neither side accepts the other's framework for talks. And right now, neither side does. The diplomatic collapse is also straining other fragile arrangements across the region. Reuters reported that envoys from U.S. President's Board of Peace met with Hamas representatives in Cairo. This was in an effort to safeguard the Gaza ceasefire, which has come under severe strain since the U.S. and Israel began their joint military campaign. Reuters separately reported that U.S. President's Board of Peace presented Hamas with a written disarmament proposal, a step Hamas has refused to take. Reuters also reported that on March 18th, an Iranian attack struck the West Bank, killing 3 Palestinian women. This was the first Iranian attack to cause Palestinian casualties in that territory. The New York Times reported that Israeli airstrikes have continued in Gaza throughout the conflict. These incidents have killed civilians, including children. The UN Human Rights Office, as reported by Reuters, stated that more than 36,000 Palestinians in the West Bank were forcibly displaced over a year. This was due to Israeli settlement expansion and associated violence. The interconnected nature of these conflicts means that the failure of U.S.-Iran diplomacy doesn't just affect those two countries. It destabilizes every related negotiation and ceasefire across the entire Middle East. Meanwhile, the military situation continues to evolve in dangerous and unpredictable ways. Al Jazeera reported on Iran's cluster munitions, which have been penetrating Israeli air defense systems. Al Jazeera also examined whether Iran may have brought down a U.S. F-35 stealth fighter. That claim has not been confirmed by the Pentagon. Bloomberg reported that long-range missiles fired from hard-to-reach Iranian bases are taking a greater toll. The Pentagon is seeking to shift funds toward interceptor systems as the war drags on. The New York Times reported that cheap drones remain a wild card in the conflict. These complicate the already complex air defense picture. CENTCOM confirmed on March 12th the loss of a U.S. KC-135 aerial refueling tanker over Iraq. By March 14th, all crew members aboard the aircraft were confirmed deceased. On March 2nd, 3 U.S. F-15 fighter jets were involved in a friendly fire incident over Kuwait. All pilots survived, but the incident illustrates the operational risks of a high-intensity campaign. Bloomberg's weekend analysis offered 2 assessments that capture the broader trajectory of this conflict. On March 14th, Bloomberg published a newsletter headlined, "U.S. President's Quick War in Iran is Turning into a Test of Endurance." It noted that Tehran's remaining leadership is betting on the long game. 1 week later, on March 21st, Bloomberg followed with, "U.S. President's short wars have a way of circling back." It observed that war without entanglement may not exist. Those assessments carry particular weight now that the 15-point plan has collapsed. Because the fundamental question facing both governments is this: if the maximalist demands of both sides are unacceptable to the other, then what mechanism exists to end this war? Neither side is willing to offer meaningful concessions while the fighting continues. The military campaign has achieved significant results. Energy infrastructure has been damaged, and key commanders have been eliminated. Over 90% of Iranian missiles have reportedly been intercepted, according to multiple reports. But Iran has not capitulated. It has not accepted the American terms. It has issued its own counterdemands that the United States will not accept. And it has publicly accused the U.S. President administration of conducting a one-sided negotiation with itself. The economic consequences of this stalemate are cascading across the globe. The Associated Press reported that Kenya's flour industry is losing millions of dollars weekly because of the war. Bloomberg reported that central banks around the world are facing a dilemma, whether to treat Iran war-driven inflation as temporary or act decisively with rate adjustments. Traders, according to Bloomberg, are hedging the risk that the war could force the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates within weeks. The human costs are also mounting in ways that extend far beyond the battlefield. The Associated Press reported that aid groups crippled by foreign aid cuts are pleading for funds. Civilian populations across the region face humanitarian pressures intensified by the conflict. In Gaza, the ceasefire is under what Reuters described as serious strain. In the West Bank, settlement expansion and associated violence continue. In Lebanon, Israeli strikes persist. In Iran itself, the Associated Press published photographs showing emergency workers clearing rubble from residential buildings. And at the center of all of it sits a collapsed diplomatic framework, a 15-point plan that demanded nuclear dismantlement, a counterproposal that demanded Hormuz authority and reparations, a U.S. president claiming talks are underway, an Iranian government saying they are not, a Pakistani offer to host negotiations that neither side has agreed to pursue. Bloomberg reported that U.S. President questioned whether an Iran deal is even possible. That statement roiled energy markets and underscored the uncertainty hanging over the situation. Al Jazeera's breaking coverage carried Washington's latest message to Tehran: accept defeat or be hit harder than before. That is where things stand right now. The plan collapsed. The counterproposal was rejected. The missiles keep flying. The oil markets keep swinging. The troops keep deploying. And neither side has offered a credible path to the table. Every claim in this video is sourced from official U.S. Central Command releases. It is backed by verified reporting from Bloomberg, the Associated Press, Reuters, the New York Times, and Al Jazeera. All source links are in the description below. If this breakdown helped you understand what just happened with these negotiations and why it matters, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This situation is changing fast, and the next development could shift everything. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.